Hi, thank you for joining us today with Dyslexia Solutions. I'm Dr. Marianne, and I have a very special guest that I want to introduce you to today. He's married with 4 children. He's a business owner. He has a radio show that reaches 1,000 to 2,000 people a day, 5 days a week. It's the largest Spanish Christian radio network in the United States. And I want to introduce John.campa to you, and he's going to share a little bit more about that as an introduction. And we're going to talk about dyslexia and how it impacts your child and what you can do for yourself if you're an adult with dyslexia, or for your child and how you can advocate for your dyslexic child. So John, welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
I gave a very brief introduction because I want people to see you right away. Will you please build around that introduction and share more about maybe the church plants you've done and the boards you've been on?
Sure. I mean, I can share about those things, but I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a testimonial to kind of glean into like how these kind of things unveiled themselves to me. So family of 14, worked in the fields, did not even want to be Hispanic. I wanted to just be American, as American be. So my wife's American, English speaking. Her last name is Kelly. I had certain things that I had in my mind when I was growing. One of them is I wanted to go back to school, and because I had dropped out of school in grade school and high school, because I was working in the fields to help my family. When you have 14 kids and you have some poverty, they look to those of us who can work. And so that happened to me. And when it happened, it caused me to be very concerned about what I was doing and why I was doing what I was doing. Because when I dropped out of high school, I dropped out for a reason, because after 4 years of being behind, when you start the harvest process, starts in June, ends in like October. So school's already started. So those kinds of things influenced me somewhat. And I didn't want to work with my hands, because all of my family worked with their hands. I wanted to work with my mind. And so I had that in my head to do, but I never realized why and how and so on and so forth. So fast forward, I became a believer at 33 years old. Our church is basically saying, hey, we're going to go to Mexico to build a house for a family. And I said, I don't want to go. And the reason I didn't want to go is because I said to my wife, I said, I know what's there. I know the poverty that's there. And I've grown from that. So in that process of having gone away and for some time, I graduated from Biola University. God kind of redeemed that piece of my life of education. And so I just missed the honor roll by a short, like maybe 1 or 2 points. It was because we had 4 kids that I needed to take time away to help my wife. And so anyway, so she tells me, she was, if you don't want to go to Mexico because of that, I think that's why you should go. So of course, my wife being my better half and the wiser, I said, okay. So I end up going, and the Lord moves me to plant a church there, just because I saw the connection of some of the poverty that was there to my heart. And so he was softening some space there in me that I didn't want to really accept, which is being Hispanic. And so he asked me this question. He said, John, why are you running from the way I created you? And I said, I don't understand, Lord. He says, well, you're Latino. I made you in my image. Why are you running from that? And I surmise in my mind. I'm like, well, all these things that happened in my past, I didn't really connect with. It was very painful. And so I didn't want to reconnect with the pain. And he says, but this is how I made you. And there's a reason for this. And I'll show you this over time. So we began the construction, or actually went to look for land in Mexico. Took me a while before I was able to find it. But as soon as we found it, there's a group of people that are, one person in particular came up to me and said he wants to give me money for this, well, actually, he wants to give money to our church. However, he said, nobody's calling me back. And so I just said, hey, I'm working on a project. And that's kind of how that first church plant started. Second church plant started in my living room. And it's a church called Fellowship in Monrovia. So similarly speaking, my wife was a director of women's ministry at Lake Avenue Church. And so while she was there, she had a lot of spiritual attack that took place. We ended up leaving the church. And then 3 years of doing, like, asking God, we need a home, a place where we can fellowship. We went and to these places, we just church hop. Ultimately, I end up, because of a friend, saying, go back to Lake Avenue. There's a service that's on at 5 p.m. on Sundays. You don't have to worry about seeing all the religious order that was there. And I said, fine. So I went to go to this service, and I connected with the pastor, connected with his message, and then started to bring my kids. And I saw something in them that was going on. And then shortly after that, I invited
I'm gonna pause you a little bit, just to rein in the area of how God was using you in your dyslexic different world. He had other plans for you. So we're not losing sight of the dyslexia. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, how it impacted you in the classroom. But you've already said you dropped out of high school, you were denying your roots. So I think this is real interesting for people who are struggling with that as well. So now we're gonna, so it just kind of bridges us back to the dyslexia topic, but how God's using your creative mind.
Right. So I started to move towards a space where all of a sudden I started to see movement that I wouldn't typically see. So I'm a kinesthetic learner.
There we go.
Because I struggled so much in school, and I didn't understand why. I was the last kid out of class when we were taking a test. I actually wouldn't finish my test for that reason, because I was ashamed, and I had some sense of, like, maybe I'm not enough, that these kinds of things would happen. So it really wounded me in many ways. And that would have been probably a reason why I dropped out of high school as well, because I couldn't catch up. And it required more and more of my effort. So I'd have to try 3 and 4 times harder to do homework. So when I finally got to university, like I mentioned, I got to university, I had to literally try 3 or 4 times as hard to get an A or to get a B. I actually had to have my wife edit my papers, because sometimes I saw the way that I was writing, I would transpose words and numbers when I was doing math. And so those kinds of things really caused me an enormous amount of hurt, even self-hurt, self-inflicted hurt, because I would think I'm not capable, or I'm not wise enough, I'm not smart enough to do the things that I'm going to be doing in the future. Well, I didn't know at that point that I was going to be running a network of radio stations that would reach hundreds of thousands of people for Christ. So I didn't know that that was even going to happen, nor did I want to expose myself, because I had so much shame and guilt regarding my culture and regarding my ability to actually lead a network of stations like this.
Were you a talker in school?
I was, well, let me just say that, no, I was probably a loner.
Oh, okay.
I became a talker.
Uh-huh.
I was very introverted, and I thought, like, I didn't really have a lot of close friends because of that kind of less than mentality.
Mm.
But that started to shift as I realized what God was doing. I'm going to just go back really quick to that
Okay.
church plant. That second church plant turned into a church. Those 4,000 people that were going to that church, and I was heading up the prayer team. I'm only wanting to say that is because I had to rely a lot on my intuition. I had to rely a lot on my spirit-led sense versus my studious type of sense, my intelligence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how bright I really was until later. I didn't realize that I can become an expert at something, and people would call and seek me out. But they went to seek me out when I was like, when they saw the level of depth that I was operating from. But that came from my dyslexic kind of mentality because I was so less dependent on my intellect, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Intuition and
My intuition and sensing, and so I could feel things at a much deeper level. And so I didn't have anybody at school. Like, my teachers would just get angry with me. I would be in circumstances where I'm trying to learn something, and I would be like, I didn't understand why I wasn't getting it. Why I was struggling so hard for some simple things. Like why it would take me to, I didn't read at all, actually, for so long. I think in the high school years, I read 1 or 2 books total, up to the age of 16. And I didn't understand why I didn't like reading. But it was because, again, the shame of like it taking me so long to get through a book, taking me so long to capture like what the story or the narrative was, until I realized some of these pieces that were in place with regards to dyslexia, that I start to engage reading at a more in-depth level, because it was more about these spaces that required, like, God was revealing something to me about who I was, and I didn't understand how dyslexia was part of that. I use it as shame and crutch.
mm-hmm.
God was actually preparing me to start a business, to run a network of stations, to be able to intuit what type of programming and content would work, to build a network of stations that connected with the audience. Because my job, even though it was the marketing director, general manager, I would go in and I would engage, like, what are people praying for? Not how many people am I going to go out and sit and talk with to sell. And so these kinds of things created this dynamic for me that I didn't understand until later on.
Well, and I'm going to interrupt you again and share with the audience that other videos I've recorded, I've talked about entrepreneurs in United States make up 35% of United States entrepreneurs are dyslexic. And then the research shows 40% of the self-made millionaires in the United States are dyslexic. Wow. So there is a wealth of creativity God gives dyslexic people, and we would be lost without them. I mean, we all need each other. And the reason we want to address dyslexia in school is if kids don't reach 4th grade and know how to read, they're more likely to drop out of high school and go into crime, go into prison. So we do want to provide that intervention before they reach fourth grade, and we want to identify it as soon as possible. And that's also addressed on many of my interviews or even my YouTube channels, my teachings. So can you start from there, John? And does something get sparked when I share that?
When you were sharing the statistics, I started writing that down because I've been fortunate enough to be successful, because the thing about a person with dyslexia is that they become very refined. Like they will take and they will extrapolate every piece, and then they start putting it back together, and then they practice, and then they extrapolate it again and then put it back together, and then they practice, and then they extrapolate it again, and then they become I mean, this term seems a little bit distant from me, but I kind of feel like I've been utilized this way. It's like very genius minded. It seems like you have a mental disorder, but the reality of it is, if someone would have told me some of these things as a child, the suffering that I went through, the guilt, the shame of like feeling inferior, would have been so much easier for me, because then I would have looked at ways to manage that. But when you come from a family of poverty and you just assume that that's who you are. And there's no answer for it. And I was born in the 60s, so 70s, 80s, it still wasn't a refined kind of psychological disorder. So these kinds of things are areas that, as I grew in business, as I grew in understanding, God was just pouring these little bits and giving me this information so that I could understand better. And really just, people have called me a media expert. And yet, as I've looked at that, I'd have to say that if I was talking about the Latino community, I know it very intimately, probably more so than most. And I'd say 95% or more. I'm that high, maybe top 2 or 3%. I understand the heart. I understand the what's motivating them. What is it that's causing them to move in spaces, and I could speak to those areas, which is why I do the radio program now. Because I wouldn't have been able to understand those areas if not for the way I take things apart and then put them back together, and take them apart and put them back together. And I have been successful, not for reasons I would have ever thought. Like this dyslexia was actually a gift.
That's right.
It was actually a blessing. And I didn't realize it was a blessing. It was, to me, it was something that was, I mean, I still feel it sometimes, where I could be talking about something and I'm talking to my family. We're talking about a subject, and then we drop the subject and start talking about something else. But then 20 minutes later, I bring up what we were talking about. And now I comment on it even at a deeper level. And they go, like, we talked about that 20 minutes ago. Why are you bringing it up? And I realize that that's just one of those things for me, that's the way my mind works. And that's not a bad thing.
Because you came back with a deeper level. And yes. I've heard that. I've had a dyslexic college student tell me that he could have sworn he had a conversation with the group of people, but when he talked about it, he hadn't. So maybe that conversation was in there. He thought he had expressed it. So that's kind of interesting.
I have conversations in my own mind a lot. And I'm consistently moving towards challenging God, my creator, to move me through spaces so that I can have a better understanding, because I don't want to look stupid. And I didn't realize why. because I don't want to tap into the shame and the hurt associated with feeling that kid that was the last one out of the room for the test, that feeling like I can't read very fast, I can't accomplish exams very well, and not realizing that those things are connected.
And it's real important that teachers and parents recognize that. Like you said, if they would have talked to you about you just learn differently. Sally Shaywitz has a book, Dr. Sally Shaywitz, about overcoming dyslexia.
Yeah.
The brain learns differently of a dyslexic child. And so some of the low-income districts that I've served in have really felt sad that their kids were at risk, not diagnosing them as dyslexic because they just didn't have the wherewithal to do that. And they could very easily screen for dyslexia, but they feel that shroud of shame for those students. And we have to change their mindset and say, no, it's a gift. You know, some parents won't call it a gift because of the struggle that goes with it. But there's the giftedness of dyslexia that Leonardo da Vinci and Walt Disney and, you know, Steve Jobs, who had dyslexia, had a giftedness about them. So we need to redirect the thinking and offer the support the way we can and get those low income, the at-risk school districts to have a paradigm shift with these kids who are struggling, that we can help them read. And I have the tools how to help them read.
Yeah, those kinds of areas that actually need attention. When I was young, it wasn't available.
Yeah.
And so I had to just practice trial and error, and it was constantly trial and error. And so I would be more tired than most because I had to work so hard mentally, emotionally to accomplish some of these things and move in spaces where I'm the most probably successful in my family. I was the first one to graduate from college. So some of these places are places that have required extra effort on my part. And if like I said, if someone would have recognized that earlier on, it would have been very helpful for me to download and then really like, okay, I attribute this to this and this to this. Like if things aren't in place for me, when I first got married with my wife, it was like, if my things weren't in place, then it caused me anxiety, because order is really important. Because the shame thing taps into that as well. It's like if it's not there, then I have to question, like, why isn't it there? And then that's where you, like, emotionally speak, and then you act out. Like I would get angry with her, like, why aren't my things where they need to be? And now it's affecting a marriage. Why are these things?
You're not talking about OCD, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe not.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's these tendencies that actually dyslexia moves through some of these spaces because it just doesn't make it. When I'm emotionally tied to something, it has an influence on how I see and act. And so some of these places that feel like someone's making fun of me or someone's not doing what they need to do, and those are all places that I then eventually start affecting how I'm acting out. And so just even revisiting, because I slept on the questions, like I read them last night and I started processing in my sleep, and I didn't realize that that's what was going on until this morning. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to talk to my wife. I need to tell her about some of these things, because oftentimes they've been points of challenge.
Well, and I think a lot of marriages have that. We're going to be married 34 years. And I have to, be sensitive to my husband and how I don't lash out at him. I don't put him down. I mean, you have to not do things to help build that strong marriage and not criticize. So, but we learn that with time, and that's,
I mean, even my math skills that are still not very strong. I feel like there's places where I have to like work on, because it's, how do you run $1 million business, right?
yeah.
Um and the numbers aren't working out.
And
Well,
dyscalculia is actually, they call it comorbid, often
um,
coexist with
yeah,
dyslexia, and that's
yeah,
dyscalculia, having the reversal of numbers,
that
missing a
happens to me
decimal
all the
point.
time. So I'm thinking this is what's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, and then this happens, and then so now I'm angry with myself. Like, why am I not getting this? And I have to figure out, now that I understand it a little bit better, what are the solutions that I can take to
One of the
begin to
things,
remove these areas that create tension points, because I'm looking at myself and going like, maybe I'm just not capable. But then now that ties to the places where God's taking me. Like he's taking me on a radio program right now where I'm on 1 hour a day, Monday through Friday. But there's another station that's opening up and presenting an opportunity where I'll be in front of 40,000 people in 1 hour. And
great
so,
opportunities.
but if I feel insufficient in this area of mathematics, then how that's going to affect, how's that going to influence my ability to engage this program now, because I don't confidently move into it? Because you can't have that sense of incompetence
Mhm.
in one area and it not affect other areas of your life.
That's right. And we talk a lot about the growth mindset, which is to see the positive outcome.
Yeah,
Quit thinking of the negative outcome. And, I would have kids come over for tutoring and oh, I'm tired, I'm sick. And I'm like, okay, well, you know what? You're going to do better now. And, let's just
right.
everything to be more positive. I wanted to, we're going to have to wrap this up soon, but I wanted to bring in for parents and teachers the information about the multi-sensory learning that
Yeah.
dyslexic kids need, but it helps all kids. So you mentioned you're very kinesthetic.
Yeah.
And I know the dyslexic kids I've worked with are very shy to speak. So we want to get them speaking, and we want to give them the hands-on, but there's a lot of visual colored markers and coloring and cutting and getting them kinesthetic as well as hearing and speaking and seeing colors. All that's going to work together to help them be successful learners.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Can I comment on that really quick?
yeah,
So the whole creativity side of things, and even being vocal, like when I was first asked to go on the radio, when I first started on the network of the radio stations, they said, you're going to give your testimony, which means you're going to speak on the air to tens of thousands of people that are going to be listening. I told them, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be at the forefront of this thing because of my voice, because I was afraid of how I was going to sound. I was afraid of how this was going to look, and the effects of that. And so now I'm on the radio and I don't have a problem. I laugh at myself because there's times, because I'm speaking in Spanish and translating in English in my head so that I don't get it perfectly, but I just go like, that's just me learning, and I'm actually enjoying it. It's a worthwhile like endeavor to actually get better and better at what I'm doing. That's just on the speaking side, because my dad actually told me, you don't have a whole lot to say when I was a kid. You're not very bright. He was very, very mean to me because he didn't think I was his son. So there was a lot of things like that were happening. Now, on the creative side, I didn't realize how creativity would actually open that up. So taking class, I used to love art, and I didn't realize why I loved art. And so I ended up taking art history for 3 years. I took it in grade school, I took it in high school, I took it in college, because I didn't realize that was actually stimulating a different part.
there you go.
And then I let it go. And the reality of it is I'm very creative. And that creative side has given me this like expanse of the universe. it's not just me wanting to draw or write in my book, because I wrote a book called Rebuilding the Temple. And it's me like looking at it and then exploring these areas that would create more opportunity for my mind to not just be connected to the immediacy of what I see.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of a sudden, I was tapping into God images and ideas and principles, parables that are in the Bible that actually speak to profound messages. And I'm connecting to them like really closely.
Mm-hmm.
It uses the word mystery 40, 50 times in scripture, but there's a reason behind it. And I understand that at a much deeper level than just reading something surface wise. And that's a result of my creativity developing.
And I'm going to invite our audience to listen to your radio show so that they can hear exactly what you're talking about. I think this
Well,
would
it's
be
in Spanish. It's in Spanish, so just be prepared.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. And if and when, if I move into this program on K-Earth 101, it will be an hour every other Sunday, and it will be in English. And it will be basically talking about, I'm trying to figure out the title now, and I got to record a program to send it for a demo so they can see what it's like.
Well, I may just have to have you back then when that comes, when that happens.
Right.
Yes. Well, I think the audience is very encouraged by what you've had to share. Even though the dyslexia wasn't identified when you were in school, and in some schools, they're not identifying it either. And parents are racking their brain how to help their kids. Just inspire them at home, motivate them at home, give them the kinesthetic, multisensory approaches at home.
Yeah. I mean,
one of the things I promote is Dr. Roger Sperry worked with the left and the right sides of the brain independently and in concert. And he said back in the 60s, and he won a Nobel Prize for this in the 80s, 20 years later, if educators could figure out how to work with the left and the right sides of the brain independently, then we would have some breakthrough in word blindedness, which was what dyslexia was called. So that's why we play music in the left ear. It does something to the left, that goes in the left ear and it crosses to the right side of the brain. And then the student is listening to input in the right ear, which is going to cross to the left side of the brain, and bypass that central part. It literally bypasses the corpus callosum, and it has a profound impact on the brain. So I want the audience to listen to our app, CDSM, and it's free on Android and iOS. It stands for Syntron Dyslexia Solutions with Music. And I have a reading program that goes with that.
I'd like to find that information myself, but I would just suggest to parents who are seeing their kids struggle that they would begin to investigate and question a little bit more and see if they are struggling with tests, if they are struggling with math. Those are clues. If they don't read a lot, if there's areas where if they could start having them draw, and if they're really creative on that side, that those are areas that can help them move towards a more confident space.
Yes.
And opens up your mind to so much more, and it helps them actually feel confident in what they're doing, versus like what I had to carry so many years of shame or of guilt of like, why can't I do this?
That's right.
We have bright kids that are sitting in front of them, and many of them, like you said, they're the Steve Jobs of the future. And it's just the potential that exists for them goes way beyond what we're seeing. And if they were able to engage that, they wouldn't maybe be so short-tempered with them. They would be so like why can't you do there's a lot of questions that come for the parents.
Lazy and stupid. But they're not lazy, they're not stupid.
Loving on them because they have something actually for their family. I mean, there's a gifting that they have Just like when I graduated from college, 3 others came behind me to graduate because they didn't realize they could.
That's amazing.
And so it's that kind of movement that begins to transform, and that child would be such an incredible source of encouragement for them. And they would actually be like encouraged and grow themselves, the parents. And then they would be advocates in the schools, because then they would be talking about some of these kinds of topics. Like if they're advocates for their kids, they're probably going to see that this is resonant in other areas within the school system. And if you have somebody that's linked in the school system, in that particular school, that's noticing this, well, they could become a network of influencers.
You know, that's so true. And we have so many issues going on in our schools right now, including losing teachers.
Yeah.
So this is amazing. Parents need to speak up. They need to speak up and advocate for their kids, get the teachers in there that need to get the training to work with those kids and other things we're dealing with. But it's all in the parents.
Yeah, some of these teachers might feel like even like they don't, they're failing with these students, and they're not.
And they don't know what to do because they're not being trained.
Don't know what to do. If they start introducing some of these concepts that you're talking about, it will begin to give them a source of encouragement when they see some of these kids kind of thrive. I remember this one family that used to take me to church, and they take me out of my element, and they saw me. They went to my school events because I went to my art,
like an art exhibit show, or
exhibits and stuff. Yeah, and they would totally speak into me. They would take me to their home, and so I know that family will be in heaven with me one day, and they're gonna go like, who is this? Who are you? And then God's gonna open their eyes and their minds and say, oh my gosh, you influenced tens of thousands of people because you took that one kid, that one little Hispanic kid, and you saw him. There's one kid, or there are kids within the school system that need that kind of attention, and they will influence the school.
Yes, and also teachers, once they get trained, they're going to impact thousands of kids over their tenure, right?
Yes.
And those kids, and teachers don't forget. They won't forget to use the highlighters, to give the dyslexic kids early notification of what they're going to be reading to help build their confidence a little bit. Allow more processing time for all the kids before you call on the kids to answer the question. Once the teachers learn these tricks of how to help dyslexic kids, they don't forget it. And it goes into all the classes, not just reading. It'll go into history and science and the other classes. So, and lives are being impacted. We know that the YouTubes are getting out here, and people are listening and benefiting and sharing. I don't see the results, and that's why you guys have to like and subscribe and comment.
I think the teachers themselves, if they see a student that's taking a long time with their test, if they see a person or a child who's struggling in particular areas like math and reading, that those are areas that are clues to them that might be able to draw into these spaces where they want to take a look at this video that you're talking about. They want to read some more into this area so that they can confidently move with these kids. And then also different ways for them to kind of incorporate creativity in that work with them.
Yep.
How do we do that? And sometimes it's not what we think. There's ways that they can explore. I found ways that I would have never thought of, even in the writing of my book, is just like, because it is such a practical element other people need to see practical in this narrative. And it's going to influence, it has influenced tens of thousands of people.
Yes.
And I'm grateful for that. It actually confidently moves me into spaces that I never thought I could.
Yep. That's so encouraging. So, John, we're going to wrap this up. Thank
Okay,
you for
well,
your time.
I could talk forever on this
I know.
subject because
Well,
it's a really sensitive place in my heart. I was in tears even just looking at your questions, because I know that there's been so much more that I really don't understand, but there's kids.
well, I think I'm going to let this be part 1 and part 2, because I want people to listen to your whole interview, and there's a lot of information here. So I may even have you back at a later time when K-Earth gives you a new assignment. I think that's exciting. And I just want to thank our audience for being here. And I want to remind you that I have curriculum I've created because dyslexic kids need to be explicitly taught in a one-to-one basis, but also there's books on Amazon. I've got Dyslexia, How to Unlock the Genius Mind of Your Child. And I'll have all this written in the details of the text. And we have A Message of Hope, How Music Enhances Reading for Dyslexic Children, and also Prisms of Brilliance, where I address the illiteracy in the prisons. And let's let the mind be that prism of genius and let these kids redirect that genius in a different way.
Wow. I mean, I can tell you that, I'm not, if I wouldn't have left Salinas and gone into the Marines, I know I would have gotten into some trouble. And I'm grateful that the Lord had a bigger plan. I'm grateful that the places I needed to go would move. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm gonna have to get these books and sit with you more, and I'd be glad to come back and talk more, because I feel like I'm just now scratching the surface on places, even just like the music piece, that I need to explore for my sake of self-confident movement into the spaces that I feel like I'm being called to.
Very good. Okay, John, our guest today was John.campa. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Audience, thank you, and tune in next week to hear part 2. Well, this is going to be part 1, so you've already listened to the whole thing at this point. So part 1 and 2, now we're going to be divided. But anyway, thank you, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye now.
Okay, very good. Thank you.